Chess appeared in India, presumably in the 5th century. Nobody knows who invented this game. We only know some ancient legends, and here is one of them. Many centuries ago, the people of India suffered from bloody battles between the armies of warlike rulers. To help the people, sages invented chess as a bloodless substitute for war. They said, if you want to struggle, then let the chessboard be the battlefield. Look at the chess pieces. They are similar to soldiers, bishops, and knights. There is no need to kill each other. It is better to compete over the chessboard. The rulers accepted this idea, and peace has come to India. Chess has become popular all over the world. Chess is a game for two players, black and white. Chess appeared in ancient times as a military game. That is why the two players are sometimes called opponents. One of the opponents has the white pieces, and the other has the black pieces. They make their moves strictly in turn. The game is played on a chessboard. The chessboard consists of 64 squares. It is divided into 8 rows of 8 squares, alternate dark and light, also called black and white squares. There are 32 light-colored and 32 dark-colored squares on the board. The players sit facing each other with a light-colored square of the board at the lower right-hand corner. Always place the board so that each player's right-hand corner square is light-colored. This rule is easy to remember. White to the right. Chess is played with black and white pieces. The pieces arranged on the board form a position. The position at the beginning of a game is always the same. A picture of a chessboard printed in a book or on a computer screen is called a diagram. This diagram shows how the pieces are placed at the beginning of a game. The white pieces are at the bottom, and the black pieces are on the top. A move is any movement of a chess piece from one square to another. The players make their moves strictly in turn. We will speak about the chess pieces and the way they move a bit later. Now, let's study the chessboard. You cannot read the rest of this course or make any progress at chess without being able to read chess moves. Have a look at the chessboard. It consists of 8 rows which go from the left to the right. The rows contain alternate dark and light squares. These horizontal rows of squares are called ranks. The ranks are numbered from white's viewpoint, 1 to 8. So, let's list the ranks starting from white's side. Rank 1, Rank 2, Rank 3, Rank 4, Rank 5, Rank 6, Rank 7, Rank 8. Starting from black side, Rank 8, Rank 7, and so on. The 1st and 8th ranks are called the back ranks. The rows which go from bottom to top are called files. These vertical rows also consist of alternate dark and light squares. There are 8 files on the board. The files, from white's left to right, i.e., black's right to left, are lettered A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Each square has its name. This name is the letter designating the file, followed by the number of the rank. For example, to find the D5 square, find the D file and the 5th rank. Intersection of the D file with the 5th rank gives D5. Oblique straight lines of squares of the same color are called diagonals. The diagonals are usually written as, for example, E1-A5 or C1-H6, i.e., the names of squares at the edge of the board are separated by dash. Unlike ranks and files, diagonals differ in length. The A1-H8 and H1-A8 diagonals, which connect the corner squares, are called the long diagonals. Each of them contains 8 squares. There are 26 diagonals on the chessboard. Their length varies from 2 to 8 squares. Some groups of squares have their special names. The right side of the board from White's viewpoint is called the king side. The left side of the board from White's viewpoint is called the queen side. The squares d4, d5, e5, and e4 are called the central ones. Together, they compose the center of the chessboard. The chessboard is limited by the A and H files and by the first and eighth ranks. So, the outermost ranks and files outline the place of play on the board. Each player's army consists of 16 pieces called chessmen. Again, chess appeared as a war game in ancient India. The pieces, then, represented the four main parts of an army: infantry, cavalry, elephants, and war chariots, plus the king and his counselor. In English, the elephants have become bishops. The cavalry are called knights. The pieces in the corners are called rooks. Rook is a corruption of the Persian Rook, meaning a war chariot. The counselor is now a queen. This piece is called the king. There are two kings, one on each side. When recording a chess game, the king is given a letter K. This piece is called the queen. There are two queens, one on each side. When recording a chess game, the queen is given a letter Q. This piece is called a rook. Each player has two rooks. When recording a chess game, the rook is given a letter R. This piece is called a bishop. Each player has two bishops, one light squared and one dark squared. When recording a chess game, the bishop is given a letter B. This piece is called a knight. Each player has two knights. When recording a chess game, the knight is given a letter N. A bishop and knight are called minor pieces, and the queen and rooks major pieces. This is a pawn. Each player has 8 pawns. When recording a fixed chess position, a pawn is written as a P. When recording a chess game, the letter P is omitted. The pawn is also a chess piece, though sometimes chessmen are subdivided into pieces: king, queen, rook, bishop, and knight, and pawns. Thus, we have examined the chess pieces and learned their names. We also know the symbols for them used in chess books. In the first lesson, we learned the names of squares. So, now we can record the events as they unfold on the chessboard. We still do not know how the chess pieces move, so we still cannot record their moves, but we can put down a fixed chess position. For example, the position on the diagram is written as follows: White, KG1, QB4, RE1, BC5, NF3, PG2. Black, KH8, QD7, RA8, BG7, NF6, PC6. Now, let's memorize the starting position and learn how to set up the chess pieces on the board before a game. Remember that the starting position is always the same. In the starting position, the rooks stand on the corner squares. The knights stand next to the rooks. The bishops next to the knights. The queens and kings are in the center. The king has a crown. Note that the queen always starts on the square of its own color. Each player has 8 pawns placed in front of the pieces. If you look at the starting position attentively, you will see that the positions of black and white are symmetrical. Any chess game starts from the starting position only, so you should remember it. If it is difficult for you to memorize the starting position at once, Try to do it step by step. So, the white rooks are placed in the corners of the first rank. These squares' names are A1 and H1. The black rooks are placed in the corners of the 8th rank, A8 and H8, symmetrically. Imagine that you are outlining a chessboard with 4 lines, A1 through A8, A8 through H8, H8 through H1, H1 through A1, connecting the rooks. The 4 rooks look like 4 towers forming an impregnable fortress for the chess kingdom. The white king and queen should obviously be in the middle of their army. Their starting positions are the E1 and D1 squares, placed at the intersection of the first rank with the E and D files. Remember that the queen always starts on a square of its own color, so put the white queen on the D1 square and the king on E1. Put the black king and queen symmetrically. The black queen goes to the square of its own color, and the king right next to her. The bishops are positioned next to the king and queen, and the knights next to the rooks. Following the symmetry principle for the starting position, black must put his bishops on C8 and F8, and the knights on B8 and G8. Now put 8 white pawns on the second rank and 8 black pawns on the 7th rank. The starting position is now set up. Let's imagine a straight line between the D and E files, dividing the chessboard in 2 parts. The queens turn out to be on one side. That is why that side, A, B, C, and D files, is called the queen side. The kings turn out to be on the other side, E, F, G, and H files, called the king side. Look at the starting position of the white and black pieces on the queen side. This diagram shows the starting position of the white and black pieces on the king side. Imagine a straight line between the 4th and 5th ranks. The lower half of the board, ranks 1, 2, 3, 4, is called white's camp. The upper half of the board, ranks 8, 7, 6, 5, is black's camp. The imaginary line between the 4th and 5th ranks is called the line of demarcation. Let's get acquainted with how the chess pieces move. White always makes the first move, and the game continues with the players moving alternately. Only one piece or pawn may move in a single turn, except when castling, which is explained below. You can imagine a move as a line on the chessboard, and we will use various graphic images to visualize them in this course. The diagram shows a graphic image of a rook's move. The rook can move any number of squares vertically or horizontally if its path is unobstructed. In other words, the rook moves forwards, backwards, or sideways in one straight line. That is, along a rank or file, as far as it likes, provided nothing stands in its way. There are 14 possible moves for a rook on an empty chessboard. So, we can say that a rook controls 14 squares. To control a square is to be able to move to it. Control of squares is a very important component of chess strategy. A rook is a long-range line piece. If an opponent's piece stands in a rook's way, then the rook can capture, you can also say take, that piece. Capturing involves moving your piece to a square occupied by the opponent's piece. The enemy piece is removed from the board, and your piece stops on that square. You may never move a piece to a square already occupied by one of your own pieces. In chess, capturing is always optional. You do not have to capture a piece just because it is possible to do so, unless it is the only legal move. The only case of obligatory capture is where the capture is the only possible way of terminating a state of check. This will be explained later on. When recording a game, a capture is indicated by the symbol X. The diagram shows a capture with a rook. You may never capture your own pieces. Besides, with the exception of the knight's move, a piece can only move as long as its path is unobstructed. No piece, with the single exception of the knight, can jump over another piece. In the diagram, the rook can move to any of the following squares on the 5th rank: A5, B5, C5, E5, F5. The rook can also capture the black bishop on G5. However, it cannot move to H5, as no rook can jump over pieces. The rook can also move to any of the following squares along the D file: D8, D7, D6, D4. However, it cannot capture the pawn on D3, as you may never capture your own pieces. The rook can move neither to D2 nor D1, as it cannot jump over pieces. At the starting position, all rooks, 2 white and 2 black, have 0 mobility. As you can see, they are trapped by pieces of the same color. To make the rooks mobile, the players should advance some pawns and develop some pieces. So, a rook's mobility depends on the presence of open files and ranks. The bishop moves diagonally in any direction if its path is unobstructed. In other words, the bishop moves along a diagonal, forwards or backwards, and as many squares as it likes, provided nothing is in its way. All diagonals contain squares of one color. Therefore, the color of squares along which a bishop moves always remains the same. A bishop is the only piece that can only move along squares of the same color. Each player has 2 bishops, one moving along the light-colored squares and one moving along the dark-colored squares. In the starting position, the white light-squared bishop stands on F1 and the black light-squared bishop on C8. The white dark-squared bishop starts on C1 and his black counterpart on F8. A bishop's capture is similar to that of a rook. If an opponent's piece or pawn is positioned in your bishop's way, you can capture it, removing the opponent's piece from the board and placing your bishop on that square. In the diagrammed position, the bishop can capture the knight on B3. The bishop can neither jump over pieces nor capture pieces of its own color. The bishop is a long-range piece. When in the center of an empty board, it fires in 4 directions, controlling 13 squares, which is only 1 square less than a rook. At the edge of the board, the bishop's mobility is restricted to 7 squares. Note that the rook's mobility remains the same even in a corner. This is because the rook moves along both light and dark squares, while the bishop moves along squares of one color. 2 bishops of the same color supplement each other, so they are much stronger when acting together. An opponent's piece can always hide from the light-squared bishop on a dark square, and hide from a dark-squared bishop on a light square. It is significantly more difficult to hide from a pair of bishops. The queen is the strongest chess piece. It can move any number of squares horizontally, vertically, or diagonally if its path is unobstructed. In other words, the queen combines the powers of rook and bishop. That is, moves straight ahead, straight back, sideways, or along a diagonal, and as many squares as it likes provided nothing is in the way. The queen cannot jump over pieces. A rook or a bishop positioned in the center can move in 4 directions, whilst the queen is firing in 8 directions. When standing on one of the central squares, d4, d5, e4, e5, the queen controls 27 squares. Queen's activity decreases when it moves from the center to the edge of the board. However, even in the corner, the queen controls 21 squares. This cut in mobility is explained by the decrease of the diagonal, bishop squares. There are 13 such squares in the center, and only 7 in the corner. Note that the number of linear rook squares always remains the same and equals 14. If an opponent's piece is in a queen's way, then the queen can capture it. Capturing involves moving your queen to a square occupied by the opponent's piece. The enemy piece is removed from the board, and your queen occupies that square. In the diagram, the white queen can capture the black f6 bishop. The knight is probably the most tricky piece. It does not move in a line, but jumps. The knight is the only piece that may jump over other pieces. The knight's move is L-shaped. The knight always jumps in the same sequence: 2 squares in a straight line, and then 1 square at a right angle. It must end its move on a square of the opposite color from the one on which it started. A knight placed on a light-colored square always moves to a dark-colored square. And, on the contrary, from a dark-colored square, a knight always moves to a light-colored one. The diagram shows the squares controlled by the e4 knight. The 8 squares are available to the centralized knight. A knight can never control more than 8 squares. Knight's activity depends on its position on the board. The 8 squares are available to a central knight. Knight's activity on the edge of the board is limited. From a corner, the knight only commands 2 squares. The knight is not a long-range piece. It takes a knight at least 4 moves to get from the first rank to the opposite edge of the board. A knight controls less squares than a queen, rook, or bishop, but it has a unique feature. The knight is the only piece that may jump over other pieces, both yours and opponents. In the diagram, the knight can bypass the pawn barrier along the 5th rank with the move nd4 to e6. It is interesting to note that a knight does not control neighboring squares, but it can jump over them. We may say that in contrast to the other pieces, a knight does not move but jumps. Look at the initial position. None of the long-range pieces, neither white nor black, can move as their activity is restricted by the pawns in front of them. Only the knights are able to move immediately thanks to their wonderful capability to jump over pieces. When a knight is jumping over other pieces, it does not affect them. It may only capture on the square to which it moves. The opponent's piece or pawn is removed from the board, and the knight occupies that square. Note that a knight can potentially attack 8 pieces simultaneously, while a bishop or a rook can threaten only up to 4 pieces. Only a queen can also attack 8 pieces simultaneously. This, along with the unique movement pattern and the ability to jump over other pieces, gives the knight some really sophisticated potential in combinations. The knight's movement pattern is very unusual. The king can move one square in any direction. In other words, the king moves like the queen, but only one square. The king can only control up to 8 squares. On a corner square, the king controls only 3 squares. The king can capture opponent's pieces. The opponent's piece or pawn is removed from the board. Then the king occupies that square. The king's movement obeys one very important rule. The king cannot move to a square controlled by an opponent's piece. The king can obviously move to a square controlled by a piece of the same color. In the diagram, the white king can only move to e5 because the squares f3, f4, f5, and d5 are controlled by the black queen. The d4 and e3 squares are controlled by the black knight, and the d3 square is occupied by the white pawn. The white king can capture the black knight on c3, but it cannot take the d5 bishop as it is protected by the c3 knight, i.e., is under the knight's control. The white king can move neither to c4 nor to e4, as these squares are controlled by the black bishop. 2 important points follow from this rule. 1. It is impossible to capture the king. 2. The kings remain on the board until the end of the game. A king can never move to a square next to the enemy king. The kings are always separated by at least 1 square. In notation, the pawn is written as a P when recording a position. When recording moves, the letter P is omitted. It is sufficient to name the square of the new position of the pawn. The pawn is the least valuable of chess pieces. It moves only straight ahead and 1 square at a time, except on its first move. So, as compared to other pieces, a pawn walks step by step. A pawn can never move backwards. Note that in diagrams, white pawns always move upward, black pawns downward. On its first move, each pawn has the option of moving either 1 or 2 squares. After that, it can only advance 1 square per move. In the diagram, the white e-pawn has not yet moved. Therefore, it is allowed to go right to e4. This move is recorded as e2-e4. The 2-square move is optional. So, if a player does not want to play e2 to e4, he may play e2 to e3 and go e3 to e4 later. The black pawn on c7 can also move 2 squares, c7 to c5. The white g3 pawn has already moved from its starting position, so it can move only 1 square forward now. Unlike other pieces, the pawn does not capture with its ordinary move. It moves only straight ahead, but it captures 1 square diagonally forward. When your pawn captures an opponent's piece or pawn, that piece or pawn is removed from the board, and your pawn takes its place. In the diagram, the white pawn can take either the black rook, e4 capture d5, or the black knight, e4 capture f5. It is easy to see that a pawn usually controls only 2 squares, unless it is situated on the edge of the board, where it can control only 1 square. A pawn moves only forward and can never move backwards. If it is not possible to move forward, then a pawn must remain on its square. In the diagram, the white d4 pawn and the black d5 pawn stand in each other's way, so they are both blocked, and neither can move forwards. It can happen that whole sets of pawns block each other, forming sophisticated patterns on the board. In this position, 5 white and 5 black pawns form an unmovable monolithic construction, or, according to chess players' terminology, blocked pawn chains. You can prevent an opponent's pawn advance by placing your piece in its way. In such a situation, one can say that the piece blocks the pawn. In this diagram, the white knight is blocking the d4 pawn, while the black bishop is blocking the f5 pawn. Both black and white pawns cannot move forward, but each of them controls 2 squares. The pawn is a piece of rather modest possibilities, as compared with other chess pieces, but it has one magic feature. Upon reaching the 8th rank, the pawn must be promoted to any piece of the same color except the king. In other words, the promoted pawn may not be exchanged for another pawn or a second king. You can make a pawn a queen even though your original queen is on the board. This means that it is possible to have more than one queen or more than 2 rooks, knights, or bishops per player on the board. In the diagram, the b7 pawn can be promoted to a queen. This move is recorded as 1 b7-b8q. A pawn move to the 8th row and its promotion to a new piece is one move. Black advances his pawn to f1, promoting it to a knight. 1 f2 to f1n. As you already know, the queen is the most powerful piece. That is why a pawn is most often promoted to a queen. This promotion means a huge increase in force. Note that when a pawn reaches the last row, it cannot remain a pawn and must be promoted. There is one more rule associated with pawns, which is a stumbling block to learners. It is called capture en passant, in passing. When your opponent moves a pawn 2 squares on its first move, and your own pawn is on your 5th rank on an adjoining file, it may capture your opponent's pawn by moving to the square over which it has moved, just as if it had moved only 1 square on its first move. Look at the diagram. If white's pawn moved to b4, on his very next move, black could, if he wished, capture the pawn diagonally on the b3 square, which was passed by the white pawn. The white pawn is removed from the board, and the black c4 pawn goes on b3. The capture en passant, in passing, is not obligatory, but this option must be exercised immediately or it will be lost. You cannot make another move and take the pawn later on. Only a white pawn on the 5th rank or a black pawn on the 4th rank can take in passing. Only a pawn can be taken, and only when it has used its right to move 2 squares on its first move. For example, in the diagram, white plays 1 b2 to b3. Black does not want to capture the white pawn and replies with 1 h7 to h5. White continues with 2 b3 to b4, and black cannot take on b3 because white used 2 moves to advance his pawn to b4. The capture en passant is a difficult rule, so do not become upset if you are struggling with it at first. You simply need some practice. The positioning of pawns, or as chess players say, the pawn structure, characterizes a position in many respects. Thus, a great French chess player, Philidor, emphasized, "The pawns are the soul of chess." The diagram shows the possible moves for both sides at the beginning of a game. Now imagine that we have removed all the pawns from the board. Now, the firing lines of long-range pieces are not restricted. Without pawns, a chess game would be rather short, and the board would become almost empty in 4 or 5 moves. Thus, though pawn properties are rather modest in comparison with other pieces, the pawns do provide a balanced development of the game. So, we are now acquainted with all of the chess pieces. Each piece has an average value. Which piece is stronger and which is weaker? Some pieces are more powerful than others because they are able to control more squares on the board. Therefore, the queen is the strongest piece and a pawn is the weakest. How can we evaluate the strength of a chess piece? The table of relative chessman values is useful. Being the weakest, the pawn serves as a unit of chess piece strength. Pawn equals 1. Using the pawn as a measuring unit, we can approximately evaluate the strength of the other pieces. The knight equals 3 units or pawns. Knight equals 3. The bishop equals 3 pawns. Bishop equals 3. A bishop controls more squares than a knight on the empty chessboard, but the knight cannot be obstructed and has access to all 64 squares, compared to the bishop's 32. These special factors favor the knight so much that its true average value approximates to a bishop's. The rook is the equivalent of 5 pawns. Rook equals 5. The queen is the equivalent of 9 pawns. Queen equals 9. The value of pieces becomes important every time there is a possibility of capturing or exchanging pieces. During the game, it is important to keep the value of each piece in mind. In some positions, average values can be misleading short-term, but normally they are a good guide, and the player with stronger pieces has better chances of winning the game. In general, compare the value of the pieces you lose to the pieces you win, and pick more favorable trades. A queen and a pawn, for example, are approximately equivalent to 2 rooks. A minor piece, a bishop or a knight, is worth 3 pawns. Winning a rook for a minor piece is called winning an exchange. The exchange is worth, on the average, nearly 2 pawns. The king is a special piece. It cannot be moved to an attacked square. How to evaluate it? Since the fate of the game hangs on the king, it cannot be given a numerical value. We shall talk about it in the next chapter. Though the king is not very mobile, it is the main piece on the chessboard. The name of the game, translated from Persian, means the king's death. The object of the game is the virtual capture of the opponent's king. This wins the game. Any move that attacks the opponent's king is called a check. In other words, a check is a threat to capture the king. When a piece moves to a square from which it threatens the enemy king, that piece is said to give check, and the king is in check. In the diagram, white's king is checked by the b7 bishop. The international notation uses plus to signify check. As all other pieces, the king can be attacked, but unlike all the other pieces, the king cannot stay on the attacked square. You are not permitted to commit suicide in chess. The king must get out of check immediately if it can. A player may not place his own king in check. In the diagram, white's king is in check and must get out of the black bishop's attack. In the diagram, the black e5 knight gives check to white's king. The king cannot move to the marked squares as these squares are controlled by the opponent's pieces. Thus, the king is forced to retreat to one of the 6 squares, d4, e4, e3, d2, e2, c2, which are not attacked by black's pieces. A king may be checked by any opponent's piece or pawn except the king. Only the king cannot give check to the opponent's king. As a king can never move into check, it follows that it can never move to a square next to the enemy king. As you remember, the kings are always separated by at least 1 square. If one of the players is being inattentive and makes a move that places his king in check, he must retract that move and make another, with the piece he previously tried to move if that would be legally possible. If a king is left in check for even 1 move, that move and all subsequent moves are void. Previously, it was customary for the checking player to announce check. The current laws of chess game do not require making such an announcement as it may disturb other players. There are three types of check. In the diagram, playing 1 Rook A2 check, Black gives common check, i.e. the moving piece gives check. The second and third types are discovered check and double check. Here is an example of discovered check. Playing 1 D4 check, Black opens the B7 H1 diagonal for his bishop, which gives check to the white king. Here is an example of double check. Playing 1 Knight E5 check, White attacks the black king with two pieces simultaneously. When giving discovered or double check, two pieces act from the attacking side. Therefore, a long-range piece has to take part in the combination. In the last example, the D1 rook is the long-range piece, as was the B7 bishop in the previous example. What should you do if your king is in check? There are three possible methods of getting out of check. 1. Moving the king to a square where it is no longer in check. 2. Capturing the checking piece. 3. Placing one of your own pieces between your king and the attacking piece. This method is not available against a knight. Look at the diagram. To avoid the check, the white king can either move to D2 or capture the B3 pawn. Other squares are not available for the white king. The white king cannot take the B4 knight as it is protected by the black king. The second way is to capture the opponent's piece or pawn which is giving check. Besides moving the king to B3, C2, D2, or D3, White can take the piece which is giving check. If the opponent's piece which gives check is not protected by another piece or pawn, it can be captured by the king. The third method to defend from check is to place one of your own pieces between your king and the attacking piece. This method can be called interposition or blocking defense. Basically, you cover your king with a piece or pawn. You can block a diagonal, file, or rank. Note that it is impossible to cover the king if it is attacked by a knight. In such a case, you must choose between moving away your king and capturing the opponent's knight. After double check, you can neither cover your king nor capture both pieces giving the double check, because it would require two moves. Thus, there is only one way to defend from double check, which is to move the king to another square. This position presents an amusing case where the white king, while running away from the check, gets discovered check with the D1 rook. There may be a situation where one of the players cannot protect his king from check. No matter how he replies, his king will still be under attack. This is called checkmate, Persian shamat, the king's death. The word checkmate is universally abbreviated to mate. If the king cannot get out of check, it is checkmated and the game is over. Check is a threat to capture the king, and mate is a check from which there is no escape. Mate is the final goal of the game. Whoever gives mate wins. In the diagram, the white rook checks the black king. Black can neither 1. Capture the H8 rook which is attacking his king, 2. Cover from the check, 3. Nor move his king to any square. This is mate. White has won the game. International notation uses # to signify checkmate. In the diagrammed position, black can mate in one move with 1. Queen C3 checkmate. White can neither cover his king from attack, move the king away, nor capture the black queen. He cannot continue with 2. Knight captures C3, as after this move, the white king would be attacked by the h1 rook. In such cases, chess players say that the white knight on d1 is pinned, and the black rook pins the white knight. The players move alternately, and only one piece or pawn may be moved in a single turn. But there is a single exception to this rule. Once during a game, each player has a privilege of moving two pieces in a single move, the king and one of the rooks. This is called castling. Castling involves two moves made on the same turn, one by the king and one by a rook. To castle, you must move your king 2 squares towards the rook with which he is to castle, and place the rook on the inside square next to the king. Castling is an important move because it allows you to place your king in relative safety and also allows the rook to become more active. As each player has 2 rooks, there are 2 types of castling: kingside castling and queenside castling. Note that the distance between the king and the h1 rook is 2 squares, whilst the distance between the king and the a1 rook is 3 squares. This is why kingside castling is also called short and queenside castling is called long. In this position, both black and white can castle both kingside and queenside. Kingside short castling is recorded as 0-0, 00. Queenside long castling is recorded as 0-0-0, 000. Each player can castle only once in a game. The following conditions of castling are obligatory. 1. Neither the king nor the rook have moved before. If one of the rooks has moved while the other has not, then castling is possible with the unmoved rook. 2. There must be a clear pathway between the king and the rook involved. 3. The king must not be in check. 4. The king must not pass through check, i.e., it must not cross a square in range of an enemy piece, but the rook may cross such a square. This can happen in castling with the queen's rook. 5. The king must not move into check. A king which has been checked earlier in the game is still free to castle if it has never moved and is not in check now. As you can see, black has already used his right to castle. Now white can castle too, but only kingside. Queenside castling is impossible, as the queen's rook has already moved. Now black cannot castle as his king is in check. Black can move his king to d8 or e7 to avoid check, but in this case, the right to castle will be lost. With c6, black keeps his right to castle. Black cannot castle kingside, as the black bishop must leave the f8 square first. However, queenside castling is possible. The black king can castle to neither side, as white's bishops control both the d8 and g8 squares. Castling is also impossible for the white king now. The black bishop on f1 hampers kingside castling, whilst the h6 bishop prevents queenside castling. The white king can castle to either side. Black's king cannot castle because of the white pawn on e7. Now we know what is check and what is mate, but these are not all of the possible fates of a king. In the diagrammed position, black is to move. The black king has no squares to move to. However, there is no mate, as the king is not attacked. This situation is called stalemate. So, if a king is not in check but that player can make no legal move, the game is a draw by stalemate. It is not mate because it is not even check. The game cannot go on as the stalemated player has no legal moves, and yet neither player has won. So the game is called a draw. In the diagram, white has an extra rook. Therefore, this result is very disappointing for him. Stalemate can occur not only with the lone king, but in the presence of other pieces or pawns as well. In the diagram, white is to move, but neither his king nor pawn can move. This is a stalemate, and the game is a draw. Black to move, stalemate. Black to move, stalemate. Black to move, stalemate. White to move, stalemate. In some cases, mostly with beginners, stalemate is caused either by the unskillful attempt to give mate to a lone king or by indiscreetly playing for the opponent's piece's extermination in a situation where the opponent has a significant material disadvantage. However, having a significant material advantage, a pawn's value equals 1 unit, while the queen's value is estimated as 9 units, white could win the game. The quickest way to the win is the following. 1. Queen b3, bishop a7. 2. Queen b7, checkmate. Sometimes, a losing player manages to arrange a stalemate position, deliberately sacrificing his last piece, or even 2 or 3 pieces. Black has material advantage. The queen equals 9 pawns, while the rook equals 5, but white escapes mate thanks to a stalemate. 1. Rook e3. Queen captures e3. Draw. White's position seems to be hopeless, as there is no evident defense from mate in one move with queen f1 to h1 checkmate or queen f1 to g2 checkmate. But he finds a miraculous escape. 1. Rook h8, king captures h8. 2. Queen c8, king h7. 3. Queen h8, king captures h8 stalemate. So far, we have learned about the following possible outcomes of a chess game. 1. Mate. A. Win, if you give mate to the opponent's king. B. Loss, if, regrettably, your king gets mated. 2. Draw. A. Stalemate. B. There remains 2 single kings on the board. Let's consider one more type of draw. 1. Queen g6, king h8. 2. Queen h6, king g8. 3. Queen g6, king h8. 4. Queen h6, king g8. 5. Queen g6. The black king is forced to repeat moves, as it cannot avoid repeated checks. Such a playing pattern is reminiscent of perpetual motion and is called perpetual check. Under conditions of perpetual check, the outcome of the game is considered a draw. Usually, the weaker side tries to lead the game to perpetual check in order to avoid a loss. In some cases, the idea of perpetual check is combined with stalemate patterns. In the present diagram, white has 3 extra pawns and black's position seems to be hopeless. However, note that the black king also has no squares to move to. Alas, this is not stalemate because the black rook is on the board. So, black should try to sacrifice his rook. Here, a perpetual check comes to aid. 1. Rook f5. 2. King g4. Rook f4. 3. King g3. Rook f3. 4. King g2. Rook f2. 5. King g1. Rook f1. The black rook has gone mad. 6. King G2, Rook F2. 7. King H3, Rook F3. 8. King G4, Rook F4. 9. King G5, Rook F5. 10. King H6, Rook H5. 11. King takes H5. Stalemate. Notation. How to read moves. Now you know the principal laws of chess and can play a real chess game. We have already learned about the basics of chess notation. We know the symbols for chess pieces, chessboard squares, check, and mate. But you should also learn how to record your game and how to play through others' games on the board using the record of moves, or notation. The rook moves from d1 to d5. This move is recorded as follows. Rd1-d5. The letter of the piece is followed by the square it leaves and the square it moves to. Many nations use their own symbols for pieces. In books intended for readers from different nations, pictorial symbols are used instead of letters. This move is recorded as Ng2-e3. Captures are indicated by X. The captured piece is not mentioned. Thus, Nf3 x e5 means knight f3 captures on e5. Knight captures e5. White castles kingside, which is recorded as 00. Black castles queenside. It is recorded as 000. Q G3-E5 plus. The plus sign indicates check. Sometimes check is written as CH. 1. Q G1-G7 hash. A hash symbol indicates mate. Note: A2-A4. The symbol for pawn is omitted. A game is usually written in two columns. The moves are numbered. White's moves are on the left, and black's moves are on the right. Look at the notation of the following short game. 1. E2 to E4, E7 to E5. 2. Bishop F1 to C4, Knight B8 to C6. 3. Queen D1 to H5, Knight G8 to F6. 4. Queen H5 captures F7 hash. This kind of mate is called scholar's mate because of its simplicity. We recorded the game in long notation form. Besides long notation, there is also abbreviated notation, which is more common. In abbreviated notation, only the destination square is given. So, abbreviated notation of the scholar's mate is as follows. 1. E4, E5. 2. Bishop C4, Knight C6. 3. Queen H5, Knight F6. 4. Queen captures F7 hash. Abbreviated notation takes less space and time. However, some ambiguities may arise. 1. C captures D4. Pawn captures show the file from which the capturing pawn comes. Thus, CXD4 means pawn on C3 captures on D4. If either of two rooks, bishops, or knights can legally move to the same square, they are differentiated according to the file or rank. For instance, in the diagram, two rooks can go to C1, one from A1, the other from F1. In abbreviated notation, the move with the A1 rook must be written as 1, RAC1. The move with the F1 rook is written 1, RFC1. In the diagram, white has rooks on b2 and b7, which can capture the black knight on b5. The capture by the b7 rook is written r7 x b5. At first, it would be better to use long notation as it is more convenient for inexperienced chess players and is better for learning. The table below contains the list of symbols used in notation. X is capture, 0-0 is kingside castling, 0-0-0 is queenside castling, plus is check, hash is mate, stalemate is stalemate. You will meet many other symbols in chess books. The most common are exclamation point, a good move, double exclamation point, an excellent move, question mark, a bad move, double question mark, a blunder, exclamation point question mark, a move deserving attention, question mark exclamation point, a dubious move, EP, en passant, in passing. The most common ending in chess is king and queen against a lone king. King and queen can mate the opponent's lone king. But how to do it and where? In the center of the board, the king has 8 squares to move to. Is it possible to mate in the center of the board? Let's look at some examples. White has improved his position, but there is no mate as the black king can retreat to d7 or e7. No mate again, as the king still has 2 squares to retreat. Thus, it is impossible to mate the king in the center of the board. To mate the black king, we must drive it to the edge. Let's look at some examples of mate on the edge of the board. The black king is mated. 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 Let's see how we can push the black king to the edge. First, we must decide where we want to chase the king to. Let it be the 8th rank. Generally, the king can be pushed either to the A or H files or to the 1st or 8th rank. Note that the queen is able to drive the king to the edge on its own. To mate the king, white should follow a definite plan. The plan consists of the following steps. A. Drive the king to the edge with your queen. B. Move your king up nearer to assist your queen. C. Your king and queen cooperate and mate easily. This is your first chess plan. Be careful when implementing the plan. Once the king is on edge, great care must be taken not to give stalemate, which concedes the opponent a draw. 1. King e6. 2. Queen c5, king f6. 3. Queen d5, king e7. 4. Queen c6. The queen is positioned a knight's move away from the black king. 4. King f7. 5. Queen d6, king g7. 6. Queen e6, king h7. 7. Queen f6, king g8. 8. Queen e7, king h8. Now, 9. Queen f7, a bad move, leads to stalemate. To mate, it is necessary to use the white king, so it should be brought nearer to the queen. 9. King f2, king g8. 10. King g3, king h8. 11. King g4, king g8. 12. King g5, king h8. 13. King g6, king g8. 14. Queen G7, mate. King and rook are also able to mate a lone king. Again, to mate the black king, you should push it to the edge of the board. It can be driven to the first or to the 8th rank or to the A or H files. Mate. This is a key position. Look at the arrangement of the kings. The kings stand on the same line, with one square between them. As chess players say, the white king is in opposition to the black king. The opposition is necessary when mating a lone king with king and rook. This is the only exception when it is possible to mate without the opposition. The black king cannot escape from the mating net, as its movement is restricted by the edge of the board. Unlike the queen, one rook cannot push the opponent's king to the edge of the board on its own. Let's say the black king is already cut off by the 7th rank while the white king is still far away. How to mate? It is necessary to move the white king towards the black king and take the opposition. Until you set up the opposition, checks and other moves with the rook make no sense. 1. King E2, King D8. 2. King D3, King C8. 3. King C4, King B8. The white rook is attacked. Move it further from the black king, keeping control over the 7th rank. 4. Rook H7, King C8. 5. King D5, King D8. Now the straightforward. 6. King D6 fails due to King E8. 7. King E6, King D8. Six. King E6. The white king is in the knight opposition and does not let the black king move towards the white rook because of 6. King E8. 7. Rook H8, mate. 6. King C8. 7. King D6. Now black would be glad to skip his move, as any move worsens his position. Such a situation is called zugzwang. 7. King B8. 8. King C6, King A8. 9. King B6, King B8. 10. Rook H8, mate. Without zugzwang, mating with king and rook is impossible. Let's now see how we can push the black king towards the edge of the board. To do this, we make the following steps. Cut off the king from the rest of the board along a rank or file. Knight opposition, zugzwang, opposition, pushing check with the rook, which turns into mate at the edge of the board. Let's decide where to push the black king. Let it be the H file. 1. Rook E4. The rook cuts off the black king by the E file. King F6. 2. Rook E1, King F5. 3. King D4. White takes the knight opposition. 3. King F6. 4. King D5. Black is in zugzwang. 4. King F7. 5. King D6, King F8. 6. King D7, King F7. 7. Rook F1. The rook check pushes the black king aside. 7. King G6. 8. King E6, King G5. 9. King E5, King G4. 10. King E4, King G3. 11. King E3, King G2. 12. Rook F8, King G1. 13. King E2, King G2. 14. Rook G8, King H3. 15. King F2, King H4. 16. King F3, King H5. 17. King F4, King H6. 18. King F5, King H7. 19. Rook G1, King H6. 20. Rook G2, zugzwang, King H7. 21. King F6, King H8. 22. King F7, King H7. 23. Rook H2, mate. This general method of mating is reliable. However, a subtlety on the 6th move allows mating much faster. 1. Rook E7. White changes his plan just in time. He decides to stop pushing the black king to the H-file and immediately cuts it off by the 7th rank. King G8. 2. King E6. King F8. 3. King F6, King G8. 4. Rook A7, King H8. 5. King G6, King G8. 6. Rook A8, mate. A king and a bishop cannot mate a lone king. Despite white's significant material advantage, the draw is unavoidable. The following positions illustrate that mate is impossible. Bishop B7, King B8. Bishop B7, King A7. Bishop E4, King B8. Bishop B7 stalemate. King and knight also cannot mate a lone opponent's king, so the game is a draw. Knight B6. King A7. No mate. Knight C7. King B8. No mate. Knight B4. King A8. Knight C6, stalemate. Although a pawn is weaker than a bishop or knight, sometimes a king plus pawn duo can win against the opponent's lone king. This is possible thanks to the ability of the pawn to promote to a queen when it reaches the back rank. Obviously, promoting a pawn to a queen or at least to a rook is sufficient for a win. Promotion to a bishop or to a knight leads to a draw. Let's examine some key positions of the basic endgame. King and pawn against king. The white pawn strives to reach the promotion square. Black hampers this, positioning his king on the pawn's way. The outcome of the game depends on who is to move. If it is white's move, black can draw, as white is forced to stalemate the black king. King E6, stalemate. If it is black's move, white wins. 1. King D7. 2. King F7. King D6. 3. E8 equals queen. White wins. Here we see a mutual zugzwang. In rare cases, a tempo can mean a disadvantage, and having to move is fatal. Understanding this position will help you to solve the practice exercises. Having learned the rules of chess, we can try to play an actual game. Let us remind you that chess is a game for two players. So, if a conflict arises during a game, the player's behavior should correspond to the following rules. 1. The touch-move rule. If you touch one of your own pieces, no matter on purpose or inadvertently, when it is your turn to move, you must move that piece if this can legally be done. For example, if playing as white you have touched the d4 pawn, then you have to make a move with this pawn. If you touch an opponent's piece, on purpose or inadvertently, when it is your turn to move, you have to capture it if that can be legally done. It does not matter whether this capture is profitable or not. For example, you are playing as black. If you have touched the d4 pawn, then you must capture it with the rook. If a forced move is illegal, then the piece touched stays on its square without consequences. In such cases, there are no penalty actions, and you can make any other move with another piece. Examples: A. You have touched the a8 bishop. However, the a8 bishop is blocked by the b7 queen and has no possible moves. So, the bishop you've touched stays where it is, without any consequences. B. You have touched the g7 rook, but if the rook moves, the black king turns out to be checked by the b2 bishop. In this situation, the rook move is impossible, so you must make some other move. You have touched the white pawn on g2. According to the laws of chess, you must capture it. The g7 rook is pinned by the e5 bishop and cannot move, so black is forced to play queen b7 captures g2 check. White replies with knight e1 captures g2, and black is losing his queen. The white pawn turns out to be very expensive for black. If you wish to adjust a piece, no matter yours or an opponent's, then you must first say, J'adoube, I adjust, and only after that you can adjust the piece. If you first touch the piece, then the touch-move rule applies. You are allowed to adjust pieces only during your turn. If it is your opponent's move, you have no right to adjust pieces. 2. Once the hand has been taken off a piece after moving it, that move is completed and cannot be retracted. While your hand is touching a piece, you can move that piece to any possible square. After you have taken your hand off, it is your opponent's turn to move. It is important to follow the rules even when you play a friendly game. Never take your moves back. There are special etiquette guidelines for playing chess. Before and after a game, the players shake hands. The loser is the first who offers his hand, saying, I resign. Any of the players can propose a draw by making a move and saying, I offer a draw. There are two possible answers, accept or no. It is not correct to talk during a game. From the ancient times, chess is called the game of kings, so the players should follow etiquette while playing. Now that you have learned these basic rules of chess, you are ready to join the several million people who have come to enjoy chess. Chess mazes serve as exercises for concentration. You have to find the quickest and the only way to reach the goal. These exercises teach you to stay attentive, accurate, and concentrated. In the given exercise, the white king must reach the marked square, avoiding the squares controlled by the black pawns. The ability to pick the best plan amongst several possible ones is characterized by concentration span. The goal is to find the quickest way to capture all of Black's pieces. Memory is the ability to keep facts in mind and recall them at will. To solve an exercise, you should permanently keep the current position in your memory. An example: which square will be controlled by both pieces after 1, Rook e2 to f2? Imagination is the ability of the mind to imagine, to picture something that is not yet evident. Solve the exercises for imagination without moving pieces on the board. Example: can the a2 knight reach the g8 square in 4 moves? Logical thinking is based on the ability to recognize cause-effect links. Example: which king will reach the marked e4 square first? Combination recognition, or tactical vision, is the ability to recognize basic logical links between the elements of the problem. This allows one to see and examine various solutions. Example: checkmate the black king. Creative thinking will help you figure out new concepts and knowledge. These exercises contain some new elements. Example: mate in 1 move.